Welcome back. This is NewsXWorld and I'm Rishabh Gulati and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the globe. Now, the standoff on the coast of Yemen has been intensifying. World shipping is under attack and US-led ground strikes against the Houthis are making global headlines. The latest escalation is part of a long simmering civil war. Joining us now is Mohamed El Dahshan, a development economist who is from Egypt. He has studied in Oxford. He's a fellow of Chatham House in London and has been traveling extensively in Yemen, interacting with the stakeholders as the former chief economist of the UN peace mission in Yemen. He is currently based out of Amman in Jordan. So what is happening in the country? Who are the Houthis? What impact is the Gaza war bringing about? What about the Riyadh agreement? What's the role of Saudi Arabia and Iran? And how can the global community promote a lasting peace deal? Let's have this conversation. Mohammed, thank you very much for joining us on Focal Length. Let me begin by asking you the straightforward question. What is the current political and governance situation in Yemen to the best of your understanding?
Well, Yemen is currently split between two authorities, with the de facto authority in the north, including controlling the capital Sana'a, which is governed by the Houthi group, or as they refer to themselves as Ansar Allah. They control, shall we say, 75% of the population and most of the economic and human centers of the country. And on the other side, the other government, which is the legitimately internationally recognized government, is headquartered in the southern city of Aden, and it controls a number of other resources as well as international recognition. So you have this de facto split of a country, and the civil war, shall we say, the violence has subsided a lot in the last 2 years, thankfully, but the political process is still very slow to come by.
Right. So can you help our viewers understand what gave rise to the Houthis?
Sure. So the Houthis they began really as a religious educational movement in the 90s, in the northwestern part of Yemen, in the region of Sada. And then exploiting, shall we say, historical religious grievances over the following decade, turned into a political movement, and engaged in a number of clashes with the government of Yemen at the time. So we're talking between 2003 to 2010, shall we say. But it grew in political clout. It acquired a number of allies, and so has become an increasingly important and influential political movement in Yemen, until around 2013, 2014, it decided to expand its geographical control and took additional parts of the country, including the capital Sana'a. And since then has essentially been probably the most powerful political actor in Yemen. But it started as, like, it did not start. It's not a religious war. It is very much a political movement that exploited the number of grievances that people had, as well as played very well its positioning game, shall we say, as at times as an educational religious identity, or at times as presenting itself as a counterweight to other extremist groups. Remember, at the time, Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula was a massive problem. So it presented itself as a counterweight to religious extremists. So it played its cards very well, essentially, and grew in support and in control of different parts of the country until it became the dominant group in the country.
All right. Okay. So what did the Riyadh agreement then manage to achieve, and what could it not accomplish?
Well, the Riyadh Agreement of 2019, and really other international efforts, including, I guess I would say, chiefly the Stockholm Agreement of 2018, have all aimed to build sort of the beginning steps of reconciliation between the different warring parties in Yemen. The Riyadh Agreement specifically, I guess the main aspect of that would have been to unify the anti-Houthi parties and groups and hopefully try to get them to align and sort of unify their positions. But like a lot of those agreements, the devil's always in the details, right? And you can have very good headlines and titles, but if the implementation details are not agreed upon, then you will not obtain much in terms of implementation. And that's what happened with the Riyadh agreement. There's a level of distrust between the anti-Houthi front, shall we say, the main actors there. So they were not really able to implement much in terms of unifying their positions. So I was not one of the main was not a very successful endeavor, unfortunately.
All right. So, Mohammed, what is, to your understanding, what is the role of Saudi Arabia, Iran in the current situation?
Well, the roles of Iran and Saudi Arabia are very, very different. Saudi Arabia has entered the war as a primary actor in 2015, and therefore it's not a secondary actor. It's not a support actor. It does support the legitimate government of Yemen, and is its main backer and sponsor. However, it has been an active part of the conflict. But Saudi Arabia has been trying really hard to sort of extirpate itself out of the war, and has been over the last 2 years has been engaging in direct negotiations with the Houthis, with Ansarullah, um, in an attempt to reach an end to this. But really, for Saudi Arabia, they just want to get out of that conflict, and they just want to pacify their southern border with Yemen. Um, it is now it attempts to present itself as a mediator, which is interesting, but it is ultimately one of the main actors in that war. um, However, it does come to the negotiation table with good ideas, and making reasonable offers. So its political engagement currently is hopefully will be very successful. Iran is a very different. It's a very different story. Iran is not a primary actor in that war. It is the the primary backer of the Houthis, um, but their support um, is a lot more technical, advisory, and and military, and in terms of weapons to the Houthis. Um, However, it is not, as is often presented, the puppet master of the Houthis. It does not have that type of control as it does in some of its other proxy allies in the region. So it is the primary support of the Houthis, but it does not control them. It's important that people don't make this mistake, because that understanding sort of helps us understand what can be achieved, or how can we reach peace, right? So this is an important secondary actor, but it does not have the type of control that sometimes we assume that it would have over their allies on the ground.
Okay. So, when we talk of the UN roadmap for an overarching sort of peace deal, where have we reached on that?
The UN roadmap is The UN roadmap is a suggested plan from the office of the special envoy, like the main UN mediator for to help bring an end to the conflict. Um, and the roadmap sort of focuses in a first phase on restoring a number of services and a number of revenue streams. So they're trying, for instance, to resume the exports of petroleum, which has been the main source of revenue for the state, and which have stopped around the end of 2022. Um, and a number of and of course, achieving a ceasefire is also a key item on the roadmap's priorities. Violence, as I mentioned, has lessened significantly in the last 2 years, but has not stopped entirely. So the roadmap hopes to achieve a lasting ceasefire. And then, following sort of those number of first phase measures, the roadmap hopes to engage the different political parties in the political process, in something that would resemble, say, power sharing process, but hopefully um, to unify as much as possible the political power in Yemen, and to just have all of that sort of mutually recognized between the parties. So we're not entirely sure what that political process will look like, because there hasn't been much engagement on this, notably from the side of the Houthis, haven't been very open to engaging in that political process. But however, it is hoped that the roadmap will reach a political settlement that would allow Yemen as a state to function normally, and would allow Yemenis to live in a more stable and predictable environment. So it is an optimistic plan, and but as it stands, we have not seen much progress on this yet.
All right. So has the war in Gaza been a trigger point for the escalation or just a pretext?
I think it's a really interesting question. It's perhaps both a trigger and a pretext. Now, in the beginning of the Houthi interventions in the Red Sea, you may recall that their stated purpose was to stop any ships going to Israel, and they would be only targeting Israeli interests um, in the Red Sea, right? And they were very specific about this. Of course, it was both. So the war in Gaza definitely was a trigger in the sense that the public opinion in Yemen, much like in much of the world, really believes that a lot more can be done in terms of halting the genocide in Gaza. But at the same time, for the Houthis, it presented a good pretext to present itself once again as one as being involved in a war, but also as defending the interests of the nation at large, which was very important for the Houthis to divert attention um, from local discontent. Right, that was last year. Before all of that, we had seen a number of like a rising protest movement within Sana'a itself, with people demanding their rights, demanding their salaries, etc. So there's been a rising discontent in Yemen, and yeah, and the intervention in the Red Sea was a very good diversion for the Houthis, to get the attention away from having to deal with the local problems. However, the way that the countries that responded to that, primarily the United States and the United Kingdom, rather than engage in um, rather than engage in a negotiation or in a way to sort of lessen the tension, they decided to respond um, rather awkwardly with military intervention, right? So the US UK strikes in Yemen have not achieved anything tangible, but have also led to an escalation in response from the side of the Houthis, right? So that has, shall we say, taken a life of its own. Right? That issue could have been contained a lot earlier had external actors decided um, not to respond so heavy-handedly, shall we say. So that could have been dealt with a lot better. Um, but it will. So now it has sort of taken a life of its own. It definitely, of course, all of this impacts the peace process within Yemen, because that has added a complicated dynamic and additional heightened intervention from other actors. So this has definitely made things a lot more difficult for the efforts to achieve peace within Yemen.
And before I let you go, I have to ask you what role can the global community now play in promoting a lasting peace agreement in Yemen?
That's a good question. There's definitely room for mediation and dialogue between the parties, right? And the United Nations is leading that effort. It's very important that the international community sort of get behind the UN on this and support their efforts, rather than attempt to do any other counterproductive measures and sort of just working in an unplanned fashion. But ultimately, though, it's important that we remember what the situation in Yemen is within Yemen, right? Yemen, even before that war, Yemen was one of the poorest countries in the world. Um, and the last 10 years have made things significantly harder for Yemenis. So it is very important that the target of any support or any intervention by the international community be the welfare and the benefits of the citizens. This should be the guiding line um, of every intervention, every type of support that can be done, right? So the efforts should center around one supporting the UN-led political process and not try to have their divergent political processes, but two, put the advantage of Yemeni citizens, at the center of all of the thinking of the international community regarding supports. So that would be.
All right, with that, we take a break. See you on the other side.